Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fix YouTube channel. My name is FPL Phillips or Eddie. I'm delighted to be bringing to you the first algorithm themed video of the year. If you're familiar with the channel, then we of course do the weekly series Eddie versus the algorithm, where I take on an algorithm free hit team every game week of the season. I beat the algorithm over the course of 38 game weeks last season. I'm hoping to do it again this year. But to see that, we're going to have a look at the algorithm team and how it's shaping up, not just for game week 1, but actually what team the algorithm thinks is best to start the season with in general. All that to come, so make sure you stay tuned as we get into this video. Okay, so not just for game week 1, as mentioned, this game week is game weeks 1, 2, 3 that the algorithm is projecting to score a total of 171 points, which works out as something like an average of 56 points per game week, which if you gave me that now and said you're guaranteed to have this at the start of the season as an average over game weeks 1 to 3, I'd be pretty happy with that per game week, so per se. And the algorithm to do this is lining up in a 3-4-3 formation, which is a pretty popular one this season. I think 3 at the back is largely the most popular formation again. But let's see what the goalkeeper situation is saying in this side, because I think it's one of the positions that is kind of up in the air. There's not one massive standout goalkeeper like we kind of have had in previous years at the 4.5 bracket at least. Well, the algorithm has gone for Mark Flecken in goal for Brentford, who I think are a very interesting team to go with a defensive asset from. Seeing a lot of talk around Crystal Palace and how good they were last season, defensively and attacking at the end of the season, but defensively in particular, they're getting a lot of attention around that data point that they came 5th for expected goals conceded out of all teams over the course of the season. And, Dean Henderson is a very popular asset for that reason at the moment. However, there's still a little bit up in the air about whether he will be the first choice. There's Sam Johnston still at Crystal Palace, and so you're not really sure 100% who is the number one there. And you definitely don't want to start off the season with a 4.5 mil goalkeeper, get to game week 1 or game week 2, and then realise they're not necessarily first choice, because that's a transfer you don't want to be forced into making, in my view. So going with someone like a Flecken, who is definitely going to be the number one for their side, I can see the appeal of that. And furthermore, Brentford were actually 6th for expected goals conceded last season, which I don't think is something everyone knows, but they were only just behind Crystal Palace, so they did have good numbers there. I think the problem that you get with a Mark Flecken or someone like Sells at Nottingham Forest, if he ends up being the starting keeper, but even there it could be Miguel, then you've got Flecken and Sells, these keepers who concede more goals than their expected goals conceded data would suggest, i.e. they're not saving some of the shots that maybe they should be saving, and Brentford and Forest are conceding more goals than the XGC data suggests they should. So that's the one thing to bear in mind with Flecken, and to not take maybe XGC data at exact value. You need to look at how the goalkeepers are performing as well, and how that's translated into actual clean sheets last season, which in Brentford's case is not very many of them. But yeah, I still think he's a really good option, and definitely considering him to be my starting goalkeeper come the start of the season. So let's move into the defence and see who we've got to get some hope of some clean sheets from if Flecken's not going to be keeping any. We've got Gabriel, Vardiol and Byrne in the defence starting there, but we're going to reveal the bench at this point as well, just because it has got 2 defenders on it, so I want the context of them in here too. We've got Harwood Bellis of Southampton, and then also we have Robinson of Fulham down there as well. So 2 4.5 mil defenders who are going to be rotating through and through. Gabriel and Vardiol, the 2 nailed and starting defenders. That's a very popular strategy at the moment, to have those 2 more premium or 5 mil plus defenders who you're going to start week in, week out, regardless of fixture. And then 2 4.5 mil defenders, maybe even like a 4.0 Mbarco, who you could start as well, or Harwood Bellis in this case is the 4 million defender of choice for the algorithm. And I like this backline quite a bit. The one I'm not massively keen on is Gabriel. We've got Calafiori coming in at Arsenal now, who could be a risk for some minutes, and Gabriel being a minutes risk come game week 1, it's gone wrong just last season. Personally, I think there's better options at 6 million alone, so you could go for Saliba even at Arsenal from that price, or Vardiol, who is also in this team. At 6.5 million, you've got Ben White, but again, minutes along that Arsenal backline, besides Saliba, I think he's the only one that's 100% nailed. Or, people are going to go for Raya in goal, I imagine, as well. Other than that, you could just try and find the extra mil to upgrade to Trent, which I think is probably worthwhile doing. Trent at 7 million is a price that we've not really seen him at too many times in the past. It's often been more expensive than that last season, etc. So yeah, I think finding the extra mil to go from Gabriel to Trent is probably worth the upgrade. But I like Burn and I like Robinson as the defensive pair. Let's take a look at some other 4.5 mil defenders for comparison, shall we? We've got in here as well Mykolenko and then also Anderson, who, if I'm correct, got 2 assists last night in pre-season. So he's looking very good. 4.5 million is cheaper than he was last season. He was 5 million. I think he's going to offer some tremendous value. And if you're not going for Munoz or the Palace goalkeeper, then I think Anderson would definitely be my 4.5 mil defender option of choice. So clean sheets last year. Crystal Palace led the way there with 10 with Anderson. Newcastle and, all these teams picking up more than 8. So happy with that. A lot of good defences in here. But Anderson, Burn, Mykolenko all got 2 goals last season, whereas Robinson was more of an assist threat. We said that Anderson still got 3 of his own, so that is kind of why he's leading the way out of these 4 for me, and maybe why I pick him over a Burn or Robinson. The predicted points, however, go in favour of Robinson over the first 3 game weeks in total. Burn is just in for this game week based on the predicted points for game week 1. That's the only reason he's starting in the team. Robinson then comes in for the algorithm for game weeks 2 and game weeks 3 after that. And the fixture ratings do go in favour of Newcastle here. The Palace fixtures, 14th they're ranked for game weeks 1 to 3. Does improve a little bit after that, but, the Palace fixtures aren't quite there like they might be with Newcastle and Fulham for the first few game weeks at least. I mean, we all know that early wild card is often something that we're kind of forced into or does become a very popular thing once we know who's in form, who's not in form as expected, because at the start of the season is a very volatile time, and often there are players who hit the ground running that we weren't expecting at all, and the race to get them into your team can be a very fast one. And so an early wild card is something that often happens. A lot of people will be aiming for around game week 6, but if you want a wild card in game week 4, then you should be looking at these short-term fixture rankings, in my view. So yeah, Anderson would still be my number 1 choice. I do really like Mykolenko as well as Robinson. Burn, again, is another one where Newcastle do have some assets in that backline that could end up with Burn not starting games. There are Livramento. Burn could start at centre-back or left-back, of course, or he could end up starting at neither. So that is a bit of the problem there. And I'd keep an eye on the Newcastle team news as we get nearer to the game week 1 deadline, is my view. So let's move back into the side then and have a look at the midfield. It's going to be Mo Salah taking the captain's armband for game week 1 with that away fixture against Ipswich. They've got Saka, Gordon and Kevin De Bruyne rounding up the midfield. One who I've not seen in many teams at all, Kevin De Bruyne. Saka and Gordon, pretty popular assets. I don't think we need to discuss too much about them. But Kevin De Bruyne has a premium at 9 million rank. It's one that I don't think you're going to see in many teams. I think there's worries about his fitness levels with, he is getting on a little bit in terms of Premier League football speaking. So I don't think De Bruyne's going to be picked over the likes of Foden. I don't think he's going to be picked over the likes of Bruno Fernandes at a cheaper price point. And I can kind of see why. But the algorithm has got him highest on predicted points for, I think, game week 2 or out of the midfielders when Man City take on Ipswich. I think the algorithm's got him in for that game against Ipswich in game week 2 to take the captain's armband as well. And that'll be because up front there is no room for Erling Haaland in this side. It's Alexander Isak, Kai Havertz, and then Chris Wood. A front line that I do really like the look of, and there's a double up there on Arsenal and a double up there on Newcastle as well. And to have a final deep delve into some of the attacking comparisons, let's take a look at Chris Wood and whether or not he's worth it over Muniz or João Pedro, who I think will be the most popular forwards in that price bracket alongside Wood come game week 1. So last season, they all started a pretty similar amount of games. You'd say Muniz is the biggest minutes risk out of these 3 assets, in my view. I think Chris Wood very much depends on Awanai's fitness. At the moment, it looks like Awanai might be fit. So if that's the case, then Wood suddenly becomes maybe the biggest minutes risk of the 3. But João Pedro is certainly no saint himself when it comes to that. And we saw last season, there were a hell of a lot of times where he got benched or he was subbed early. And I think although he's on penalties, if he's not on the pitch to take the penalties, then that becomes an issue, of course. So Chris Wood scored 14 goals last season. He was fantastic. The projected points go in his favour as well, 22 over those first 6 game weeks compared to Muniz and João Pedro down at the 15 and 16 point mark. So I think that personally, those fixtures that are just really good for Nottingham Forest put me in favour of going for Chris Wood. I want to know what you guys think. Muniz, if you can bench for game week 1 and then you need him for that game week 2 to game week 5 period, does look a really superior option because Chris Wood's got a tricky fixture in game week 4. There are times when you'd want Muniz over Chris Wood in certain game weeks. And I think a rotation strategy can also work really well. I think if you have Muniz as your third forward and you have a fifth midfielder or fourth midfielder who you rotate really well with, say you could even have a Forest option in your midfield, Gibbs White or maybe a Hudson-Odoi, and then a Fulham option up front. Or you can do the reverse, have Chris Wood up front and have Pereira or Smith Rowe in your midfield. There are some good rotation strategies actually between those two sides, so you could even do that. And the same goes for Brighton. You could include João Pedro as your forward in that kind of plan, or have Minter in your midfield at 5.5 million, who's looked superb during pre-season, and then you have a midfielder from either Forest or Fulham, and you can kind of get an attacking asset in from each of these teams, because I think they are teams that will do well come the start of the season. And for that reason, there are other ways to get an attacking asset in from some of these sides. And dare I say it, I think players like Minter might be more exciting picks than someone like João Pedro, despite not having the penalties, etc. I think he just looks like a really spicy option. And yeah, it might be a little bit of a risk, but as I mentioned, FPL often results in an early wildcard situation at the start of the season, and it's by no means a disaster if you do end up playing your wildcard by game week 3 or game week 4. Once you've got some information, you could be jumping on players earlier, and the ones that people are trying to scrape all their transfers and maybe even -4s together to get in at that point, you can have them all in and try and gain some ground or even recover some ground if it didn't go too well in those first 1 or 2 game weeks. So yeah, that's my view on the whole situation on the budget forward, so to speak. Isak is one that I think is pretty much nailed and will be in every team. And then Kai Havertz, who the algorithm's gone with over someone like an Ollie Watkins. I like Havertz as a pick. There's a bit of skewed data, stuff like that, coming out around him because he's had position changes. It's still not entirely clear where he'll be starting this season, whether he'll be up front or whether he'll be, reserved to a more midfield role with Jesus taking minutes off him. So that's going to be something that plays a big part. I'm not really keen to go for a forward. I think if there is a risk that they won't actually be playing in their true position and being out of position in a negative way is something that really hits hard in FPL when you end up owning a player like that. So for me, Havertz is one that I might just stay clear for now. If I'm going that high and going for that premium option, I might just try and get all the way up to Erling Haaland personally, and then have Isak and maybe even a 4.5, or if it could still fit in the budget one, by downgrading in midfield, for example, losing De Bruyne in this side could be a place you get the funds from, then that would be what I would do per se. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this team down below. Have you given any consideration to Kevin De Bruyne? Because to be honest, I hadn't really before seeing this team. So yeah, the algorithm is going with it there, and the algorithm has proven me wrong in the past. But with that, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Subscribe if you haven't already and you're new. I'll see you. Goodbye.